The 13th of October 2025, Kramatorsk Central Market, Ukraine. A single missile slammed into the market at the height of the morning rush. Stalls turned to kindling. A black column of smoke clawed the sky for miles. The human toll was immediate and savage. 34 dead, 72 wounded, and more than 60 small businesses reduced to rubble within minutes. Among the dead were 18 pensioners who had come for their monthly checks. Ambulances queued like a slow red river. Hospitals called for extra stretchers. Fire crews fought blazes that ignited nearby fuel stores and storage sheds. Neighbors pulled survivors from twisted metal and scattered produce. Faces smeared with ash and disbelief. Across Ukraine, anger boiled over. Pressure forced Kiev to make an immediate decision. This is only the beginning. Subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. The answer had been decided 72 hours earlier, while Russia's billion-dollar satellites swept the skies. Ukraine's plan began its life on the ground, hidden inside a single, unremarkable truck. It started with a dark web contract, a local driver hired for a routine haul, a prefabricated log cabin to be carried 800 miles across hostile territory. The driver believed he was hauling timber. He did not know that, beneath the wooden shell, a Ukrainian operative was quietly assembling a containerized VTOL mothership and arming 2 loitering munitions. The genius wasn't just the delivery method, it was the drone's built-in camouflage. Small signature management systems and calibrated thermal emitters let the munitions present themselves on infrared as nothing more than a sparrow, just 2 degrees warmer than the air around them. To an overworked radar operator scanning a busy screen, they would register as wildlife, not a weapon. The stakes could not have been higher. The objective was to annihilate a $2.1 billion missile motor plant and immediately remove roughly 30% of Russia's missile motor output, feeding the front. That meant threading a needle through a dense web of defenses, the Tor M2 batteries, with their roughly 10-mile engagement bubble for low-flying threats, the Nebo M family of radars that hunt small radar cross-section targets, and the Krasuka 4 electronic warfare umbrella designed to sever GPS links and blind sensors. To punch through that wall of steel and silicon, Ukraine's plan had to be surgical and near perfect. Do you think this kind of plan was genius or madness? Drop your opinion below. I'd love to hear your take. At 2:47 a.m., the unmarked truck merged into the flow of night traffic, one ghost among thousands. Its cargo manifest listed prefabricated cabin parts, nothing unusual. Yet behind the wooden panels, the air shimmered with hidden heat, a portable launch system, 2 armed drones, and a single Ukrainian agent working under the faint glow of a battery lamp. Every mile was a gamble. Russian checkpoints scanned thousands of vehicles daily, and thermal cameras could expose a human heartbeat at 200 yards. Inside the container, special insulation blocked every trace of warmth. Even the electronics were cooled by liquid nitrogen packs. The truck traveled 800 miles, blending into the enemy's own logistics stream, a ghost convoy inside Russia itself. As dusk approached on October 17th, it left the main road and disappeared into a stretch of silent farmland. The mission had crossed the point of no return. October 17th, 2025, 6:40 p.m. Outskirts of Kopisk, southern Urals. As the sun dropped behind the tree line, the unmarked truck slowed to a stop on a deserted farm road. Inside the command van on the Ukrainian border, operators tracked telemetry in real time. At first, all signals were steady, then a minor anomaly. One of the guidance gyros in the secondary drone flickered offline for 6 seconds. The room froze. 6 seconds could mean exposure, but the technician on duty rerouted the system through a redundant IMU circuit. Connection restored. The feed stabilized. The plan lived on. At 7:10 p.m., the container roof slid open. The VTOL mothership lifted into the fading light. Its electric motors whisper quiet. It climbed to only 80 feet, hugging the contours of the frozen ground, vanishing beneath radar coverage. Russian defenses stood waiting, S-400s watching the high skies, Tor M2 batteries scanning the low air corridors, and Nebo M radars flickering like searchlights across the plains. Beneath that invisible dome, the drone's thermal signature blended perfectly with the cold horizon, indistinguishable from a flock of birds. At 7:26 p.m., inside a Tor M2 command vehicle, a radar operator noticed a faint trace, too slow for a missile, too steady for wildlife. He hesitated, then fired a 9M317 missile to test the contact. The streak tore through the night. The mothership's onboard sensors screamed warning. Instantly, it dropped 20 feet, skimming the riverbank. The missile overshot and detonated harmlessly against a hillside. The Russians now knew something was coming. Alarm klaxons wailed across the blast missile perimeter. Searchlights cut the fog. Operators shouted coordinates over jammed comms, but it was already too late. The Ukrainian mothership had released its payload. 2 loitering munitions now flying low and silent toward the target. In Kiev's command room, a red line blinked once. Signal confirmed. The strike was on. 7:42 p.m., the first drone appeared on Russian radar as nothing more than a ripple in the static. A faint, drifting echo near the southern fence line. The Tor M2 crew dismissed it as a bird, but seconds later, that bird changed course. It was moving with purpose. The command post went from calm to chaos in under 30 seconds. Klaxons wailed. Searchlights slashed through the night fog. Operators shouted coordinates that disappeared in a storm of interference. Then, silence. At 7:43 p.m., the first drone dropped altitude, racing barely 40 feet above the ground. Its onboard sensors locked onto a ventilation shaft of the missile assembly bay. At 160 mph, it pierced the grill, detonating 8 pounds of shaped charge explosive inside the plant's ventilation duct. The blast was contained, and that was the point. The 0.8-second delay fuse allowed the explosion to propagate deep inside the sealed corridor before releasing its full force. The result was catastrophic. The internal pressure reached over 500 PS1, turning the entire curing hall into a pressure cooker. Reinforced walls buckled, support beams folded. In less than 2 seconds, the roof collapsed inward, crushing machinery worth tens of millions. The explosion ripped open the fuel line, feeding the rocket motor test chamber, triggering a secondary fireball that climbed 200 feet into the night sky. Windows shattered across Kopisk, 5 miles away. Russian security forces panicked. 200 Spetsnaz soldiers stormed the perimeter, firing blindly at the dark sky. A second drone was already circling. It waited for the flash, its pre-programmed signal. When it came, it dove straight into the inferno, hitting the control substation that powered the entire complex. The impact plunged the base into darkness. Alarms, cameras, and communications all went dead within 6 seconds. Inside the compound, engineers and guards stumbled through smoke thick enough to burn the throat. Temperature sensors inside the production line recorded peaks of 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit before melting. Over 40,000 square feet of manufacturing floor was gone, reduced to twisted rebar and molten metal. By 8 p.m., the fire had spread to the propellant storage area. The explosion that followed shattered the plant's north wing and threw debris over half a mile away. By midnight, more than 220 workers and technicians were confirmed dead or missing. Over $2.1 billion in infrastructure lay in ruins. The Plastmissile Complex, once one of Russia's most secure missile production hubs, was silent. Thousands of miles away in Kiev, the operations board turned green. The mission clock stopped at 4:11:27. Ukraine's plan, born in grief, designed in fury, had just rewritten the balance of power in a single perfect strike. October 18, 2025, 05:12 a.m. Kopisk, southern Urals. Dawn broke over a city that no longer slept. The horizon still burned red. The air reeked of fuel and scorched insulation. Fire crews battled a blaze that had raged all night, pouring 200,000 gallons of water and foam into what was left of the Plastmissile plant. They weren't fighting to save it anymore, only to stop the flames from consuming the nearby residential blocks. The first official reports were staggering. 218 confirmed dead, 311 wounded, and over 1,200 displaced workers suddenly jobless. More than $2.1 billion in infrastructure losses, 40,000 square feet of production space obliterated, and 3 months of missile output erased in one night. Satellite imagery captured the scale of the destruction. An 80-foot wide crater, glowing white-hot at its center, surrounded by concentric rings of twisted rebar and scorched earth. At 6:03 a.m., Russia's Ministry of Industry issued a terse statement, calling it a technical malfunction during fuel testing. But the lie fell apart within hours. Western satellites traced the precise trajectory of two loitering munitions approaching from the southwest, confirming what Moscow tried to bury. The explosion wasn't an accident, it was a strike. As the truth spread, panic rippled through Russia's defense industry. Over 50 factories across the Urals suspended operations fearing similar attacks. Production of air-launched missile engines fell by an estimated 35% overnight. On the front line, Russian artillery units began rationing missiles, and command channels grew erratic. For nearly 72 hours, encrypted transmissions between field HQs went silent. In Kiev, the reaction was quiet. No parades, no speeches, just a simple confirmation. Target neutralized, supply chain disrupted. Within 24 hours, Ukrainian troops seized 5 miles of new ground in the Donbas sector as Russian artillery fell silent. By nightfall, the red glow above Kopash had faded to gray smoke, drifting eastward. The people of the city would never forget the night their skyline turned to fire. And across Ukraine, for the first time in months, air raid sirens stopped. The sky, at least for one night, was theirs. 3 days after the strike, the world was still measuring the shockwave, not in decibels or kilotons, but in consequences. Russian missile launches across the front dropped by 42%. Production of cruise missile engines by nearly 1/3, and at least 11 military contracts worth $6.8 billion were suddenly suspended. The once proud Plastmissile plant, now a black crater visible from orbit, had become a symbol of how precision, not power, could cripple a giant. In Moscow, silence reigned. No official mourning, no televised funerals, only brief statements blaming fuel instability. But the truth was unmistakable. A single operation, executed with less than $500,000 in equipment, had erased infrastructure worth over $2 billion and temporarily paralyzed a military network stretching across 3 time zones. Every satellite photo, every intercepted radio confirmed it. The empire had bled from within. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, life tried to resume its rhythm. The ruins of Kramatorsk market were cleared. Fresh tarps covered the vendors' stalls. Children returned to school under skies that, for once, were quiet. For the families of the 34 killed in the attack that started it all, the victory was bittersweet. Justice had come, but it had come at a cost. Inside Kiev's Security Council, analysts quietly updated a single line in their report. Objective achieved. No further escalation. Yet for those who designed the operation, the lesson was deeper. War, they realized, isn't only fought with steel and fire. It's fought with intellect and with restraint. Every strike, no matter how justified, leaves a shadow on both the enemy and the soul of those who command it. As night fell on October 21st, Kiev stood under a calm, cloudless sky. Streetlights flickered on one by one, across a city that had survived too much to celebrate lightly. For a brief, fragile moment, there was peace. Not in words, but in the silence above. The message was clear. In this new kind of war, the strongest weapon is not the loudest explosion, but the mind that decides when and why to pull the trigger. War always leaves behind more than ruins. It leaves questions. Was this justice or revenge? Was it strategy or survival? In the silence after the fire, those answers belong to you. What do you think Ukraine proved that night? That intelligence can outweigh power? Or that every victory carries a price? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told with truth and precision, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter is already unfolding and you won't want to miss it.